Well, hello there, everyone. Welcome, whether you're listening to this live now or later. I am going to introduce to the world my new book on Eudaimonia in Aristotle. There we are. Human flourishing and divine telos in Aristotle's Ethics. The book is out now as a hard cover from the Amazon River, the endless flux of things and stuff. That's the one thing they're good for. So this is self-published. I put all of this together. You can see here Apollo with the muses dancing the Reigentanz, the round dance. This is a fresco from by Peruzzi. And I'm going to go over very briefly. If you have any questions on the book, let me know in the chat, and I'll try and respond to them in the end. So as I mentioned, the book is out now. Wherever you live, there should be a copy. There's a couple of different links. I'm linking to the US Amazon store. I'm linking to the UK. So you can see it here. Again, it's hardcover. This is about as big as this one here. I actually used a regular font size because I find it quite annoying when fonts are too small and you can't really read anything. And now the book is based on the Nicomachean Ethics, and it follows the Nicomachean Ethics chapter by chapter and summarizes to a certain degree the book, but my essay here tries to show that so-called first philosophy is not metaphysica, is not metaphysics, but is ethics, and that in fact, or what we might refer to put it simply as ethics, which extends to saying that you can only have a healthy ethics, a healthy metaphysics, if and only if the polis is in good order. And of course, the polis is only in good order if it is based on scolaire, which we thoughtlessly translate as leisure, and also which is rather something like sufficiency, measure of sufficiency, and a few other words. So what you will find in the book is that I basically do not accept any single standard translation. So you won't. This is not a book on virtue ethics. That's been done to pieces. Right? Where you have all these different virtues, and if you only apply those virtues, then you become a well measured or tempered, a temperate human being. And there's Bernard Williams wrote about Aristotle that all we get is a depressing account. This is almost verbatim, a depressing account of moderation. Now, it struck me that when I read this, that what he had to say on Aristotle, that it seemed to me that maybe this gentleman hadn't really read Aristotle. Because Aristotle continues, again and again in the book says, well, there needs to be exaggeration. You can only be brave and courageous when you exaggerate. And you can only be generous when you exaggerate, when you give more than could be expected. Someone who's moderate in spending is not generous. So I don't agree with the translation of arete as virtue. I translate arete as unification and unifying, as a continuous self-unification, which extends, of course, to the polis and extends to one's ancestry and to one's offspring. Yeah. And again, we have metaphysics today too, but it's a sick metaphysics because we have no good ground on which it could stand. And in metaphysics, I include any sort of quote unquote physics. Yeah. Theoretical physics, etc. Now, Werner Jaeger, I was astonished to see when I read Paideia, Volume 1, during writing my book on Aristotle this winter, and I hadn't known this, that Jäger also um, translates arete as unification of all of one's, let's say, gifts, perhaps even towards or into excellence. Um, and I, so you will not find a sort of a list of virtues in here. Eudaimonia, the title of the book, usually translated as happiness, I will come to understand as familiarity of the world, thanks to being in good spirits with the ghosts of the past and with one's ancestry. And of course, also again, through self unification towards excellence. And I go over certain sections in the book where I focus specifically on the Greek, and the meaning changes so radically once you begin to understand that arete is not just virtue. Sometimes it means character, yeah. But overall, to understand the Nicomachean ethics as basically just listing various virtues by which to become moderate is a futile attempt. And in fact, what I show is that what's you so some scholars um, claim that there's a conceptual break in book 10 of the Nicomachean Ethics, where all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, Aristotle and it brings in the divine telos of the entire book and theoria. What does theoria mean? It's not theory. Theoria means to take into consideration that which is to let it be seen. But theoria is not, it's not the contemplative life totally withdrawn from the world. It's rather theorein as an activity, but to take into consideration is present throughout the moments of our existence, of how we live our lives. And the polis is the place that serves, and this is what this book builds up to. So there's a divine telos. It's not about your personal happiness. The divine telos is what is supposed to be reached, and through the concentric circles of the cosmos, that stretches back and it continuously moves back and forth. So the human being does have a genuine metaphysical cosmic mandate, yeah, to contribute to the good order of the universum. So the book goes, for example, also into the question of friendship, or even just the word ethics. Um, why is ethics something that can be measured? Apparently, why do we have ethical frameworks, ethical standards for coffee and cars, etc., etc. Strikingly, also Aristotle is not a so-called universalist, as he continuously says in matters of health and ethics. The general or universal logos does not get us very far. So what the book ultimately tries to show is that the split that occurs, and I think occurs in hindsight, between theoretical and practical reason, between vita contemplativa and vita activa, is, if not a mistake, is in a sense cannot really be traced back to Aristotle, because theoria, especially if exercised to its most perfect extent, is the highest activity, if you like. Yeah, this is why in the very beginning here I have, after the Zueignung, which means dedication, I have 3 quotes which I can show you now. There we go. Now the second quote is from Hölderlin. Wer das Tiefste gedacht, liebt das Lebendigste. Whoever has thought the deepest adores or loves that which is most alive. And the third quote is, the first one is Est in hen noesis noesos noesis, hence thinking thinks itself. Yeah, this is from Aristotle, obviously. So you can see also how Book 12 of the Metaphysics ties in with Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. So there's no, it's not a system, but all relates to one another. And again, there's no healthy metaphysics without a healthy, well-ordered polis, which of course means healthy and well-ordered, unified individuals, let's say, citizens, as members of that polis. Es irrt der Mensch, solange strebt. That's the third quote. Es irrt der Mensch, solange strebt. Who says this? Goethe's God in Faust, part 1. Man errs as long as he strives. Now, those of you who've read Aristotle's Metaphysica will know that this is perhaps not all too far from what Aristotle has to say. Now, the book ends also with a quote from the Metaphysics. Ectes nimis empiria. From within and out of memory, experience. So the book has been described by those who've already read it, and I'm very glad to see that it's been well received thus far. I started basically mentioning the book last week, and it's been selling quite well, actually. So it's been picking up. It seems to be of interest to people, and it's been described as transformative and eye-opening, and also as rather, well, let's just say unusual, perhaps, is a good word of putting it. I'd rather say that than say original. And it's not really original. It's just trying to be really close to the text, completely ignoring what is usually being said, so that you find that the means is never a given. The imprecise language, for example, that Bernard Williams uses, for example, the means represents the means represents nothing. It's not a resemblance of anything. It's imprecise language. So instead, if you stay close to the text itself, you'll find that the most ordinary Aristotelianism is not there. And there's also a long chapter on psyche or psyche in here. Another word I don't translate, because if we translate that as soul, then it that triggers the imagination to a very unhealthy degree. And even though we might be post-Christian, we still apparently all are good Christians and understand the soul only in terms of an immortal soul that is divided somehow from the body, etc. But as Aristotle says, and Aquinas will repeat this, the soul is embodied. And in fact, Hegel's understanding of the body and of the ideality of body is, of course, Aristotelian. Yeah? So the very shape of your body, of your hands, that's the soul. That's psyche. And this is also then why, in some sense, he says, this is where we get in. The psyche is all that is, because this is where it's through the body and through the shape, through your senses, etc., that we get in touch with what is. Yeah. And with what is, quote unquote, out there, to use a more modern way of speaking. So if you're interested in a close reading of this text, but of course one that doesn't just turn into hundreds and hundreds of pages, I do focus on the most, what I would consider the most significant passages. One chapter I'm particularly fond of is on megalopsychia, and this achieving this highest moment really of self unification. And so, well, here's someone who says, so this live stream, by the way, which is currently happening, is on Aristotle and not Heidegger. But thank you for pointing out that Dreyfus slop is Dreyfus slop and remains Dreyfus slop. And so, but this on Aristotle is in a similar vein. I do not accept, as I said before, any of the dogmas from within academia or the so-called tradition. How do you start a tradition? By breaking the tradition. Yeah. So this is a moment of Anverwandlung. That's to say, it's an appropriation of this text to translate this over into our time. And here's a good question from Zobik. Welcome back. Looking forward to reading your book. Is there any previous knowledge required? Can this book be an introduction to Aristotle or Greek philosophy in general? Yes, in some sense. So first of all, it's short. So it's not going to be an introduction if you just want to have something to regurgitate, right? This is the virtue of courage. This is the virtue of the will. None of this is going to be discussed. Yeah? Courage will be discussed, yes, but not in the ordinary sense. So Frosene, I'm discussing, of course, as well, etc. So, but many of the words will remain untranslated. I will point to the standard translations, but this is not a textbook introduction. But this is an introduction, if you take the word seriously, I'm leading into the Greek way of thinking. Yeah, which you can only do through the fundamental words, and not just the words, though. Basically, the experiences, which is much more important than the words themselves. Yeah, so we're not word selling around here. What I'm trying to do is to show that there's an experience, which is why a certain thinker uses a certain word to capture that experience. And in that sense, the book Sobik is indeed an introduction. If you take again the word introduction seriously, is a leading into a Greek way of thinking. If you're only looking for concepts to be able to regurgitate them, then just use Wikipedia, which is better for you then. But this is an overall introduction, not just to a leading into, not just into Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, but also into Aristotle's understanding of God, understanding of telos. Again, telos is not just end. Telos has a temporal significance. I quote a bit from Onion's work on the origin. Where's the book? Yeah, this is a really good book, which you should buy before books all get banned. Where is it? Now here. There we go. The Origins of European Thought by Onion, which I highly recommend everyone to buy. No longer in print, but you should be able to get used older copies. And so I work with his insight into telos as well. What Aristotle is for example, he points out that the word telos as much as the word aeon, and he says explicitly in On the Heavens, when our ancestors said those words, they were in touch with the divine. And he's quite serious about that. These are not just metaphors. And so the task of the polis is to be able to be the ground for highest theoria, which is to say, taking into consideration everything that is insofar that it is and as what it is, so that things, beings can show themselves as what they are by themselves. And this then stretches back to, again, of course, the polis itself, and what we might refer to as the lower caste, which is not intended to mean to be anything derogatory. Yeah? It's a unification throughout. There's no elitism or anything of the sort at all, or any world withdrawn vita contemplativa of monks hiding away in a monastery. None of that. The vita contemplativa is a misappropriation of Aristotle. This clear cut, this schematic distinction between vita activa, vita contemplativa. It's a vita activa. Theoria is the highest activity. It's not inactivity. It's not stillness, how we might imagine stillness today, etc. Scolaire can be quite orgiastic too. And I also, for example, go over this inheritance that we have from Aristotelianism, not Aristotle himself. Aristotle never defined the human being, by the way, outright as a rational animal, animal rationale. He doesn't speak of a zoon logon echon. There are passages where you could read that into that in hindsight, but that formulation we never find. In any event, even if you take zoon logon echon, that's not a rational animal. That's a living being, a living organism that holds itself in logos. And logos is not just language or rationality, but is, to speak with Heidegger, for example, you could say is an initial gathering, is an initial concentration to let the world be seen in the first place. And to this I add that what we should have actually inherited from Aristotle, and which we're now going to inherit, because again, you have to start new traditions and break with the old, is that we should think of the human being as a zoon logon echon, zoon logon echon, theoria echon. The being that lives, and lives insofar not just as a biological brutum factum, insofar as that being takes into consideration all that is insofar as it is. So again, I've been very glad to see that even just with a few mentions on Twitter and one email on my. By the way, if you want to read, I should have mentioned this maybe before. I can just remember this now. Let me just go to my Substack if I can somehow. So you could read if you want to make sure, what the text, if you want to find out, make sure what what my writing sounds like, etc. If you're interested, this is my Substack, which you should subscribe to anyways if you haven't yet, and you can read a part of the first chapter, or rather of the introduction. So the introduction is called The Argument, which is a summary of the entire book, and you can read the rest. And as I said, it follows book by book Aristotle's and Nicomachean Ethics also. So you could just read Aristotle, basically focus your reading on Aristotle and read this book alongside and take your own notes. Yeah. And if you get a copy of the text that has the Greek to the left and the English of whichever your mother tongue is on the right, then you can at least begin to, if you don't read Greek, you can at least begin to recognize some of the Greek words that are in there. And also you'll begin to see that perhaps you can't, always translate everything as easily and in the ever same way, which should tell you also that any sort of AI translation, etc., automated translations are doomed to failure forever more and will never reach proper translation, which is always a delivering over that has to be alive, yeah, and has to always begin not with words, but with deeds that are not words and with experience. So, okay, here's Harris. Thank you, good sir, for gifting the memberships, as always. Thank you very much. And whoever is currently live, you are lucky that the very generous Harris is here, so you should give him a follow as well. This is Harris's YouTube channel, Upcycle Club. Thank you, Harris. Good to know you're here in this parasocial relationship. So, if there are any questions, let me know. If there aren't any, then let me just make a note here. I'll just show you again my. So this is the Substack article that I've linked to in the chat here. And you can see here also the same cover image. There are links to the book on Amazon. So it's print on demand. And I have to say the print quality is really good. It's only available in hardcover because I do want this to last. And this is part of the Halcyon lecture series. So I'm going to start publishing all of my courses as books. And I also have a book on Wilhelm von Humboldt and his ideal of Bildung, formation, or let's just say formation education, coming quite soon as well, later in the year. So you can read here on Substack in any event an excerpt from the argument, which is the introduction to the entire book. So that summarizes the book. That's about 40 pages in the book. I've mentioned this before. I'll say it again. I've used a normal size font, which is 12, because I don't like these tiny fonts. Maybe I can read from the book as well a little bit. The word ethical today gets thrown around wildly and widely and has all but entirely lost its meaning. Today we can consume all kinds of ethical goods, which is supposed to mean that the goods in question have been produced and exchanged according to specific but ever-changing quantified metrics, which in turn are deemed morally good if they also increase presumed utility for the consumer and value for the shareholder. Ethical today refers to something external, something that from the outside, like a framework, can be superimposed at will to any situation from anywhere. Ethical today is uncanny. The ethical is unethical in that sense. So it's uncanny, it's unfamiliar, actually. You go to a supermarket, the groceries, as you say in America, and you see all these different, the Rainforest Alliance, and this is an ethical coffee bean, and this is an ethical shoelace, and this is an ethical headphone or an ethical olive or something. You should get scared when you see this. The plethora of labels and surveillance frameworks designating and controlling for something to be ethical and sustainable should shock us, frighten us for the eerie strangeness they reveal about our non-world. In fact, these labels and frameworks have hijacked what the eudaimonic ethos is about, making the world familiar, as they produce simulacra of simulacra to soothe the genuine human need, not desire, of home. Such ethical frameworks serve but as intermediating simulations of the ethical, where the genuine ground of ethos, and that's what ethos means, is ground, has already disappeared. Slapping labels as symbolic signifiers on products and services serves the purpose to plaster over the very groundlessness of the global economy. And groundlessness is, of course, related to the anti-scholastic way of the global economy, because the schola is the ultimate ground. Plato tells us this. Athens becomes Athens in the moment in which nous the news of the Athenians reorientates itself towards Scolaire. Scolaire arrives in their midst, and that's when Athens becomes Athens. Yeah. It's not a moment in time, it's a moment in thought and in seeing and in acting. So we actively have to forget any such connotations of the words ethical and ethics if we wish to return to the source ethos. The ethical dimension concerns human dwelling and living together well in a polity. Okay, so this is just a brief, this is one page here, paragraph 2 in the this I think is also on Substack, so you should be able to read that on Substack as well. And yeah, so thank you very much for listening. And I hope to see you around here. I will go live again later this week. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the book. If you know anyone interested in Aristotle, maybe gift it to them. It does look good. It's I think that should be part of it. It's beautiful inside and out. And Hegel, of course, is right. The inner is the outer, and the outer is the inner. So, in concentric circles, we climb higher to climb down again, forevermore. Thank you. Good night. And do buy the book. Link in the description